The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
A big hello to everyone joining us today for this webinar, Discover Salesforce, DevOps, and Copado CI/CD automations. In just a moment, we'll get started, but first let's go over some housekeeping items. Next slide. Everyone's been muted, so if you have a question, please ask it in the question window of GoToWebinar. It should be located on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We'll try to get to every question during the Q&A portion, which occurs near the end of this webinar. Just a reminder, please don't repeat the questions more than once. We'll see them all. Also, please take the pop-up survey near the end of this webinar. Your feedback is valued and will help us improve future sessions. One more thing, once we get started, sometimes people have issues. If you're unable to see the slides in advance, or if you're getting audio issues, don't worry. Just close out of the session and then rejoin. That usually fixes things. Next slide. Also, don't forget to go social. Let's keep the conversation going on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Don't forget to tweet us at Salesforce Devs. We are recording today's session, and the link will be shared with you after the presentation. Next slide. During this session, we may be speaking about forward-facing features that are in pilot or beta. Please make all of your implementations, purchasing, and investment decisions based on currently what's available now. Let's get started with today's webinar, Discover Salesforce DevOps and Copado CI/CD automations. Here are your hosts.
Welcome, everyone. Hey, we appreciate your time today. Hopefully this is a value-added session for everyone. We've got a very large audience. The audience, of course, is also going to be extended through the recording. So thank you, everyone, for your attendance. My name is Andrew Lee. I've been around the Salesforce platform now for well over 15 years, actually one of the original platform product marketing team leads. Remember when we launched Apex Code. So it's a pleasure to be with you guys. And very excited to introduce Andrew Davis. Andrew Davis is one of our product leaders within Copado, but probably more interesting, Andrew has actually written a book over the last 2 years about mastering Salesforce DevOps. And Andrew, let me ask you, what motivated you to write a book on Salesforce DevOps?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I'm really delighted to be here with everybody. I began working as a Salesforce developer and a technical lead, and pretty early on realized there were a lot of challenges. Deployments were painful, and there were a lot of inefficiencies in the process. So I started building out tools myself, researching about best practices within Salesforce and elsewhere, and that's just culminated over the last few years of being full-time focused on this. So I basically gathered most of what I've learned in this book because I wanted to share with colleagues, folks in the broader Salesforce ecosystem.
Great. All right, well, let's go right to the agenda and see what we're going to cover today. So we've got a lot today to cover. Ultimately, the big question we are constantly asked, why DevOps for Salesforce? Why is it important? Then we're going to move into delivery performance. How do you really measure your performance of development and delivery on the Salesforce platform? We'll talk core about how you deliver innovation in the platform, and then we're going to move into how do you really create an automated pipeline to really move that innovation much more quickly with higher quality. We'll focus on automated quality and testing techniques within the Salesforce platform. And then finally, we'll talk about releasing and deploying your new innovation out of the platform. And we'll give you a couple tricks and tips. Throughout the entire presentation, we'll try to give you real world examples and show you what this looks like within the Salesforce platform. And primarily, we'll be showing that from the Copado CI/CD platform. We've got probably about 45 minutes worth of content, but most important today is a really good question and answer session. So as was mentioned before, if you have any questions throughout the entire session, please go out to the questions, ask your question. If you want to go one-on-one, let us know. I'd like to take this offline, but we really want to hear from you. Our goal is ultimately adding value back to your development and innovation delivery efforts on Salesforce. Next. So Andrew Davis, what is DevOps, right? This is another one of these big, hypey, markety terms, kind of like the cloud was 20 years ago. What is DevOps to you?
Sure, great question. No question, it's a buzzword. There's a lot of buzz around DevOps. The term itself came from a presentation given in 2009 at a conference called Velocity. A couple of guys, Allspaw and Hammond, talked about how their dev team and their ops teams started working together in a more effective way at Flickr, and that's blossomed into books like the DevOps Handbook that have explained in a very, very rich way how to think freshly about IT. And in particular, there's been a state of DevOps survey that's been run over the last 6 years by the team at DevOps Research and Assessment, now with Google Cloud, who have explained a lot of the best practices and actually done scientific research on teams about what enabled high performance across all these teams. So it's a big movement, and it reminds me in a lot of ways of the Salesforce community. There's a lot of passion within the DevOps community, and I think it's great that these communities are starting to bridge now.
Perfect. Next. So the big question is, how do we actually combine DevOps together with the Salesforce, and when would you want to do that? Well, it's pretty simple. DevOps allows you to operate Salesforce at scale. And that begs the question, what does it mean to operate Salesforce at scale? Well, as I mentioned, I've been around this platform now for over 15 years. We never dreamt of the level of maturity and sophistication and the level of customer experiences and innovation that would be built on the Salesforce platform. At the end of the day, operating Salesforce at scale is really about increasing the innovation velocity, or the speed at which you get your innovations out of the platform and into the hand of your users, while simultaneously increasing the trust and the quality of that innovation delivery. It is, of course, a closed loop cycle that includes planning and testing, deploying, releasing, real-time monitoring, and of course, agile planning again. And in the middle of all of this is the Salesforce platform. And as most people on the call today know, the Salesforce platform is unique. It's unlike any other platform. And when we originally built the platform, we didn't really build a structured release process into it. We really didn't think about source-based development because things like Git really weren't around. So there's really a struggle and a challenge around doing things like version control, keeping your sandboxes in sync, really being able to manage and merge and identify the conflicts. And probably the biggest issue is with these very large delivery teams that are over 5, 10, sometimes we're seeing delivery teams at Salesforce of over 200 individuals. How do you get everybody onto the same page? And of course, as Andrew Davis mentioned, there's a massive third-party DevOps revolution going on. And how do you get integration to some of those great best-of-breed DevOps tools that work specifically the way that the Salesforce platform works? The last piece we see is really this lack of compliance. The level of security and compliance required for today really means that you have to add an additional layer into your innovation delivery cycle. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Next. Now, the challenge in DevOps has always been two real competing motivations. And Andrew, you've got a lot of experience with the developers out there. What are the two motivations that really define DevOps?
Yeah, the reason the whole term DevOps came into existence is because traditionally within the IT world, you'd have a whole group of people who build new stuff and a whole separate group of people who run it in production. And those teams, in fact, sometimes even had different incentive structures. Devs were incented on how much stuff they could release, how many new changes. Ops people were incented based on stability and how well they kept everything running. And so that created competing motivations, competing visions of what success meant, and some tension between these two groups. And so that's where originally the term DevOps came from, is to break down these silos within this organization. The fundamental thing that DevOps was trying to address is the balance between change and stability. Now, the interesting thing in Salesforce is that although in the broader IT world, an admin normally is somebody who runs a production system, and that's also true for Salesforce admins, but Salesforce admins actually function more as developers. Salesforce takes care of so many of the challenges that admins have a lot of free capacity to build new things. But looking a little bit more at these motivations being in tension, so there are risks if teams don't change. Their companies are at risk of competitive disruption. There are unserved needs for users. They may have inefficient systems. People may be excluded. You may be missing opportunities. And so there's definitely very legitimate reason why companies need to change and change their IT systems. But there are risks associated with change. There's risking the trust of the users, security, compliance, quality, and money. If you take down a production system, there's a lot of risk involved in all of that. So that's where the tension came from, Andrew.
So that's the whole goal with DevOps, and it's true across all the platforms. DevOps was about breaking down that original barrier between the traditional developers and the operations team. But when we look at Salesforce DevOps, it gets much more exciting. As I mentioned, these teams are much more sophisticated, they're much larger, they're much more distributed. Now we have at least 5 different core individuals and teams that are working to really make sure that Salesforce is up, performing, and delivering the innovation as promised. At the core, we've got the developers, then we have the administrators, now we have an entire security and compliance team. The Salesforce architects need to make sure that it works in terms and in context of the overall enterprise architecture. And of course, in the largest Salesforce implementations, the IT team and the CIO are being involved to be able to support what have become tens of millions of dollars in investment every year. The ultimate goal for everyone is, how do I get faster time to market, of course, but simultaneously, how do I deliver a higher level of security and stability in those releases? What we think is most important here is that when you have that multi-million-dollar investment in Salesforce, you really need to be making sure that you're aligning the business goals and your digital transformation progress and plan together with the actual technical execution. And that's the part that's always hard, no matter what platform you're on. But in Salesforce, particularly as the business works together with the IT team, we really need to break those silos down, the result of which, of course, is a much faster, higher quality result of innovation off the platform. Next. Now, Andrew Davis, in order to do this, you've really got to kind of bring this level of system level thinking. We call that at Copado data-driven DevOps. You know, here's a screenshot from the platform itself. Maybe you could explain a little bit about what it means to drive system level thinking through the DevOps process.
Yeah, this actually is a huge, huge area that ironically, even though the IT world is, cutting edge in terms of technology, there's still a lot of legacy approaches that we take to thinking about our business, thinking about our work, what constitutes an effective team. And the concept of system level thinking is critical really in the DevOps movement. And if I go back to those 2 competing mindsets and the 2 competing set of incentives for the development people and the operations people, what they really need is a shared goal and a shared view. So they need a shared vision of what constitutes success, not just for them as individuals, but really for the company as a whole. And so encouraging people within the IT organization to look at the company as a holistic entity, and to, in particular, look at how their role fits in with the delivery of value to the customers and end users. And so what we have here is a screen from Copado that's referred to as a value stream map. So the idea of being able to visualize the different stages through which work, for example, user stories and development tasks, progress as they're being delivered to customers, and then capturing metrics on those. So you can do data-driven analysis, but if you're not looking at it in terms of the whole system, you're likely to be optimizing the wrong things. And that's a key conclusion within the DevOps movement. You really need to take a high-level, system-level view to get to measure the right things and then to be able to optimize for the right things. So in terms of the measurements, Andrew?
Yeah, well, so the value stream mapping is a great way of looking at it at the highest level and then breaking it down to the individual value streams. But everything in DevOps has really been built, and there's a foundation now of 4 measures of delivery performance that all teams across all platforms are really starting to anchor on. And it really looks at the 2 different variables. The first one we talk about is, of course, innovation velocity. How fast are you delivering innovations out into the market? And there are two key metrics that the overall industry looks at to really measure velocity. The first one is the lead time for change, which essentially is the time from when the code is committed to the time when that actually goes into production and is of use to your end user. The second one is the one that we hear a lot within Salesforce, which is your deployment frequency, or essentially how many releases do you do? Do you do releases every 6 months, every 3 months, every month, every week, every day, or multiple times per day? Now, the second variable, of course, is reliability and trust. And we know that security is that second driver of DevOps across the Salesforce user pool. We really look at two different metrics here. The first one is your change failure rate. So when you do make changes to the Salesforce platform, what % of those changes have a failure that you need to actually rectify or recover? And then the second one is, if you do make a change and you've got to fix it, how long is it going to take for you to recover? Overall, all of these are affected by a number of different performance factors, and you can see we're highlighting Accelerate, which is a really good book that was put out by the folks at Dora. They've looked at this for 8 to 10 years and kind of really anchored on these 4 metrics. But the big eye-opener that we had when we did the State of Salesforce DevOps report is that it's really the size of your delivery team affects these 4 key metrics. After that, the number of users you're supporting, the number of orgs, of course, it's the amount of customizations that you've built in, and it is critical to think about what level of tools are you using around DevOps to automate all the processes. Next. Now, here's a sneak peek into the State of Salesforce DevOps report, and this report is free and available to anybody. Just go out to Copado.com. There's a tremendous amount of data out there, and it really allows you to benchmark against your peers. We did this together with Beagle Research, so it is an independent report of several hundred enterprise Salesforce customers, and you can see we've broken out the 4 metrics, but we've also broken out 4 different levels of performance of Salesforce delivery teams. And we do this in alignment with the Dora report, which is the State of DevOps report, so that we can map you to benchmark not just against Salesforce, but against the industry standard as well. Dora works and is now actually part of Google Cloud, and we've used Tableau to really slice and dice and really do all of the analytics. Bottom line, best practices. You have the elite, which is the top 13 in Salesforce. You have the high performers, the top 36%. We believe as a best practice, you really want to be in that top 50%. So in terms of your lead time from the development to production, you really want to be within 1 hour to 1 day. Release frequency, either multiple times per day, and really you want to get to the place where you're releasing a few times per week, maybe not necessarily daily, but that is absolutely a goal. Your change fail rate really needs to be under 15%. That amount of rework that is required when you put something into production that has to get fixed is a crusher in terms of the technical debt. And your restore time really should be less than an hour, considering that it's a CRM system of engagement that have customers on the line. If you're running a very large call center, you have to be able to get up and running within an hour. Even being down for a day can be crushing to a large call center or even a field sales team. Next. Now, Andrew, to show the real world example, here are the same 4 metrics, but they're embedded into Salesforce. How would you use this?
Yeah, so this is some research we did within Copado in terms of building our own application. We first started, we wanted to make sure that we're using our own tool, and as we have been for years, using our own tool to deliver our own processes. So that's the benefit that we have of building a tool for application development on Salesforce, that we get to use it when we're building our own Salesforce application. So we've measured these metrics for ourselves. We track them over time to see the trends as things are going up and down. Maybe in the run up to a release, there's a lot of work being done. But what this does, it provides us a high level view, sort of an end-to-end view on those metrics and what kind of activities are causing things to trend up, trend down. And what that does, that allows us to then optimize for these end-to-end metrics, as opposed to just saying, oh, you know, the developers' laptops are slow, we need new laptops, something like that. But actually, the developers' laptops are not the limiting factor on the rate of our work. Maybe there's some other, you know, maybe there's too many meetings, these kinds of things, where you can begin to look at what are the actual bottlenecks in your process and tune both your technology as well as your processes to optimize for all of these things.
Okay, so we've now created a framework to benchmark where we are today and be able to identify where we want to go. And now we can actually measure progress in a good, solid, objective way. And of course, this is a long-term journey, so that will become crucial. But let's get down to the foundations of what we're trying to do when we actually create innovation on Salesforce. Andrew, let me hand it over to you. What are some of the nuances around Salesforce development and architecture?
Well, one of the things that I said in the book is that I'm not going to tell you how to develop on Salesforce because there's so many really, really good resources about how to, you know, there's Trailhead and all kinds of other tools and books and seminars and so forth that'll explain how to build things on Salesforce. That's not the challenge that we're facing. The challenge really is with all of these people now, including some of whom maybe don't have computer science backgrounds at all, they're business people, citizen developers, how do we help to manage all of that development at scale, and how do we help them to develop in a development sandbox or scratch org and move their changes systematically to production? So that's our main goal with both the book and with Copado, is really helping with that delivery process as opposed to development. But there's a lot of things that Copado is doing, and Salesforce DX. We have the benefit of being with Karen Fidelak here on from the Salesforce DX product team. She's joining us on the call. She'll be handling the Q&A later. But one of the things that Salesforce DX has done is they've really upped the bar in terms of the tooling that's available, both to end users as well as the things that we, Copado, as a product company can build on. So these are some screenshots from a Copado CLI, which is a plugin to the Salesforce CLI. So we have the benefit, obviously the Salesforce CLI makes a lot of stuff easy and provides a sort of one-stop shop where you can integrate lots of different capabilities into the same command line tool. So we definitely are providing tools to help on the development level. But a lot of the big focus that I have that was put in the book, and a lot of what I think we need to think about as an industry, is the Salesforce architecture. So this slide isn't specifically about Salesforce, but it reflects similar graphs and measures that we've done internally to look at the increase in complexity, the exponential increase in complexity that we're seeing in Salesforce orgs over time. Like Andrew said, 15 years ago, they didn't envision this level of sophistication and this level of complexity that we built on the Salesforce platform. When we did the State of Salesforce DevOps report, only something like 15% of all of the survey respondents were developing on just one Salesforce org. Companies have 2, 5, 10 or more Salesforce orgs, and 20, 50, 100 or more Salesforce developers. So what that does, there's a risk of accumulating technical debt, significant technical debt. That's one of the things we dealt with in the State of Salesforce DevOps report. And so one of the main roles of architects is to recognize the risk of technical debt and to try to avert that by designing the system in a proper way. So one of the characteristics that we noticed is that one of the characteristics we noticed in the State of Salesforce DevOps survey is that as teams scale, the lead time, the amount of time it takes to get changes out to production, scales with it. And so larger teams are slowing down. And this, on the vertical axis, this is a logarithmic scale. So we're going from, for example, being able to deliver changes that are already built in just 1 hour to being able to having to take weeks and weeks to deliver changes, even after they've been built. So development time is generally not the slowdown. When you look at these larger teams, the development time is actually just a short part of the process, but it's that delivery and testing and review process that really takes a large portion of the total time to get things out to users. One of the concepts that, obviously this is a general concept within IT, and it's definitely a big issue in the Salesforce world, I believe, is the issue of tight coupling. So sometimes you'll have, even within one Apex class, just a lot of procedural code, which just means line after line after line, tens, hundreds of lines of code that just kind of goes on forever without a clear structure. That's creates, and when you look at outside of the an individual code file, you have highly complex relationships across code files and configuration, and then especially a lack of modules or packages across most orgs. This leads to a tightly tangled architecture. If you take a contrasting example of loose coupling, there's a lot of ways to think about this, but even things like object-oriented design, which of course is very widely used across Salesforce, but also things like functional programming, modular architecture, runtime dependency injection, event-driven architecture. All of these are techniques that can help establish a loose coupling. So it was really a nice innovation several years ago when Lightning Components came out with Lightning Events to reduce the coupling on the front end, but there's still a lot of progress we can make on the back end and throughout the whole system. This is an analysis of an org. This is not the most complex org that we've analyzed, but this is one pretty complex org. Each of the tiny dots, if you can see on your screens on here on the left, each of these tiny dots is one piece of metadata, some bit of configuration or code, not all of it, in fact. The lines are the interconnections between those. And as you can see, it's incredibly complex. So if I were to ask you, okay, if you make a change to one of these components, what could that possibly affect? Well, that's a research project. That's a real challenging thing. So we're in the very early days in the Salesforce world of moving to packages, unlock packages, second generation packages, but this is an analysis we did of that same org, dividing it into modular packages. It's obviously on the right, you can see it's still, complex, but it is nowhere even remotely close to the complexity that you see on the left. And so this is the benefit in my mind of packaging, is that it makes those dependencies explicit, and it makes it possible to know much more easily who you might be affecting if you make changes to a particular package. So, Andrew?
So with innovation delivery, the whole idea here is that we're all delivering innovation off of the platform. The challenge here is that, as we mentioned, different parts of the team are likely doing it in different ways. So the whole idea with bringing DevOps to Salesforce is that we bring a much more disciplined, a much more orchestrated process across all teams to really drive that velocity, but also drive the quality of the overall delivery. Now, we break out the CI/CD process for Salesforce essentially into 6 different stages. The first half of it is really continuous integration, and continuous integration is really the agile planning and the creation, building, and development of that innovation. And you'll hear within Copado, we believe there's truly a best practice of agile development, where you make sure that all of the development and the creation is tightly aligned to an agile planning methodology, so that you make sure that you're aligning the business goals together with that development execution. Now, verify is really verify or test, and notice that verify lives both within CI and CD, because we're going to be constantly testing throughout the development, and as we get ready to deliver something out into production, we're going to continue to test through the gateways to make sure we get the highest quality product. Now, deploy and release really make up continuous delivery. And of course, we talked earlier about that difference between deployment and release, that real ability to be able to do iterative delivery, to be able to deliver only what you need to the group of users that you want to test or you want to roll it out to, but to be able to do it in a much more sophisticated way. Now, all of this moves back through what people call continuous innovation cycle, real-time monitoring, feedback, analytics, to understand the impacts, the benefits, any of the challenges that was released out into the market. And of course, this is fed in a feedback loop into the agile planning in the front. And of course, this entire process moves more quickly as we go. So Andrew, let me hand it back over to you, and you can take us through a real world example of what this might look like within Salesforce.
Sure. So one of the things that we've built within Copado and are actually releasing at this Dreamforce is improved pipeline view. Copado's actually had a pipeline view for many years, but we've greatly enhanced that. So the idea of delivering innovation is that you're moving from development through testing to production, and you might have all kinds of different variations on that process, but effectively it's a similar movement. And so it's incredibly helpful to be able to visualize all of the environments that you're working across and the way that changes flow across all of these. And so the whole practice of continuous delivery, the term itself came from the Agile Manifesto, that our highest priority is early and continuous delivery of working software. And so what we've done is try to build a CI/CD delivery pipeline that allows you to visualize the flow of changes and to streamline that whole process from development through testing to production. One of the main challenges that I've seen across companies of all sizes is the challenge with environment management. Now, we know we've got different sandboxes and test environments. Maybe now you've got scratch orgs, but environments getting out of sync is a major challenge, and it goes in lots of different directions, but sometimes there need to be changes made directly in production. Maybe there's certain kinds of changes that are whitelisted or some emergency changes, but maybe those don't get propagated back to development or testing environments. Maybe there's changes that are made in development environments that are never moved forward and so forth. Different test environments may vary, and if you have different production orgs, then the challenge is far greater, because you might have one chunk of metadata that you want to consistent across those production orgs, but it's very, very hard to ensure that over time. So the general phenomenon that you have when you have multiple environments is what's called configuration drift. And this is very much the case within Salesforce. When you refresh a sandbox, that sandbox is exactly identical to the metadata and the settings and so forth that are in your production org. The org shape and metadata, and in some cases the data, are identical. As people get in there, they make changes, of course, they diverge. And so your sandboxes become increasingly different from one another. This creates a challenge, right? This configuration drift makes it very, very difficult to really test exactly the configuration that you're trying to deploy to production. Sometimes creates problems that are very hard to debug. So that's one of the main challenges that we try to address. So there are a lot of challenges within environment management, but one of them is that we really need, so the challenge is that we want the environments to be basically the same, except for there are certain differences that we're making intentionally. We intentionally build new things in the development environment. We intentionally have some, release candidates that are in the testing environment. There may be slight differences, like in the URL endpoints and so forth between those orgs. So we have to accommodate those intentional differences while avoiding unintentional differences. So the general solution, you want to strictly limit the changes that can be made directly in an environment. It's a theme I touch on a lot in the book about locking people out from being able to make changes directly in production. But then you want a way to automate the deployments. You want a way to manage those environments. Ideally, being able to regularly destroy or refresh those environments to ensure you can bring everything back to a constant state. We understand that there's reasons why that's really challenging today sometimes. And so that's one of the things that Copado helps do, is basically synchronizing changes across those environments. So it's a little bit easier if you do want to refresh the orgs. So when we look at this whole process, one of the unusual challenges that is increasingly important is being able to manage data or data as configuration data, or data that plays the role of metadata effectively, and especially when you get these complex applications like Salesforce CPQ, Encino, Velocity. These tools, they are configured using data objects, and so there's nothing in the metadata API that directly supports that. You can't build a change set and so forth to migrate data as such. And it's very complicated to deal with complex relational data. So that's something that we're also rolling out at Dreamforce this year, is the ability to build these complex relational data templates that might have, unusually complicated dependencies across them, but then very easily and declaratively build those sets of data and migrate those either on a one-time or ongoing basis between different environments. So yeah, Andrew, on the topic of the delivery pipeline and how to make this whole thing flow better.
So we've established that need to be able to establish and create a pipeline. And really the whole game, as we can tell, is about managing and orchestrating the slight changes and nuances between the Salesforce metadata and the data. Now, where it gets really exciting and we start to really drive speed and velocity and really increase the quality is by really attaching automation. So when we talk about delivery pipeline, Andrew, how do we really start to tie automation into the entire process?
Yep. And so one of the things, this view here is similar to a view that we showed earlier that just shows the environments and their relationships. One of the things that's very important for teams to do as you want to automate your whole delivery lifecycle, and one thing that Copado increasingly enables you to do, is to actually build these automation behaviors, these smart behaviors into that pipeline. So it's not just showing an interrelationship between the environments, but actually enabling you to automatically migrate changes on an automated or scheduled basis and to put those tests in place. So one of the things that we do within Copado is to allow you to drill into any environment and see from one pane of glass all of the deployments that were made to that environment, their status, and especially if there are errors, what might have caused those errors. So extremely helpful to basically reinforce that this is all one system, so that everybody, whether they're on the development side or testing side, release management side, they all get to look at the same view and they can all understand how they're working together. Central to most of the things that are done within the DevOps movement, and also central to what Salesforce DX introduced, was the concept of source-driven development and the centrality of version control. Of course, Salesforce DX works based on any kind of version control system. It's agnostic, but Git is the overwhelming approach that most teams are using. I like to think about version control in two senses: defensive version control and offensive version control. And the reason I do this is just because some teams, are struggling to just get started. And so the easiest way to get started is what I refer to as defensive version control, just having a way to passively capture daily snapshots of your metadata that at least provides a little bit of history and a little bit of fallback without requiring the developers to completely change their methodology. It's an easy way to get started with getting Git involved in your process that doesn't disrupt things initially. What you want to move towards is what you could call offensive version control, which means actually using version control to drive changes forward. And so that's at the heart of all of the mechanisms that Salesforce DX has shared about how to work with GitLab and so forth, but it's also something that Copado gives you the ability to do with the declarative graphical user interface. And because it's particularly important that admins be included in the process, because in many teams, admins are the majority or a substantial portion, and they're actually functioning as developers. And so we need to make sure that we've got a graphical way or a declarative way for admins to participate in this whole process. On branching strategy, there's of course a lot that could be said here, but generally faster integration is better. And ideally having one central trunk. I'm not going to get into this here. It's something that we talk about in the development environment, but in the Salesforce DevOps book that I wrote. But one of the things we noticed from our research is that teams who integrate more frequently, so on the right we have teams that are integrating more frequently, means individual developers and across teams, they're merging their code bases more and more frequently, those teams are able to deploy more frequently. This is the number of deployments per year that teams were reporting being able to have. And so that speaks to the importance of integrating early and often. One of the challenges that people have in the Salesforce world when you're trying to merge code bases and different branches from different developers is the challenge of merge conflicts, and especially merge conflicts in XML are very, very hard to, Git doesn't natively handle XML very well. One of the, another thing we've released for Dreamforce is an enhanced merge conflict resolution tool, which will basically memorize your merge conflict resolution so that you will have to resolve them one time, but if they ever appear anywhere else in the process later, they'll get merged automatically, as well as a new YAML-based view, which may mean something to some of you, may not mean that much to everybody, but if you've really worked with a lot of XML, you realize it's quite hard to work with that in Git. And the YAML view makes it much easier to simply visualize the differences between two different files or more than one different file. Andrew, you want to say?
Yeah, so now we've got the whole team working. We've got a lot more people, the developers and the administrators, the architects, all working according to a single cohesive delivery pipeline. We've automated a lot of the capabilities around the merge. So essentially, we're starting to move really fast. And we've got a lot of moving parts. So anybody who's done development for any amount of time knows how crucial it is to do good testing. And of course, on Salesforce, being a very unique platform, we're actually pretty surprised about how few people had really set up a cohesive enterprise class automated testing strategy. And that really is so important in a DevOps program. Andrew Davis, take us through some of the different options and the nuances around testing and quality control on Salesforce.
Sure. So there's a term that I heard recently, a phrase I heard recently, that better brakes enable race cars to go faster, right? And so your tests are the brakes on the race car of your innovation process. So everything that we ever do is either thrown away as developers, is either thrown away and not used, or it's tested. And it's either tested before it gets to production, or it's tested by end users in production who don't realize that that's what they're doing. So please test ahead of time. This is a slide that I like to use to illustrate testing and quality. So this is what business requested, but then this is what you built. This is what's really going on beneath the surface. And quality has many levels. So when you think about software quality, there's functional quality about what it does, does it do what it's supposed to do, but then there's structural quality. Is it built right? And then there are these levels of quality that you need to also think about with your testing strategy. So the reliability of your system, its security, the performance, the maintainability, the size. So when you look at all of those aspects, that's one way of dividing up testing. There's a big section on testing in the book as well. But another way that I find very practical to think about testing is that there's some tests that just are used to give fast feedback for developers. So things like built-in static analysis. If any of you are using VS Code, the new prettier extensions that auto-format your code. Anybody who's using PMD Apex embedded in there, or tools like SonarQube or CodeScan, they can actually live in the IDE and provide real-time feedback, and then being able to run your unit tests from inside VS Code, or run them very, very quickly to get fast feedback for developers within just a few minutes to make sure you haven't broken anything obvious. But there's another whole, suite of tests you need to think about before you're actually going to be releasing things to end users. And these tests may take longer to run, but it forms part of your comprehensive testing suite. So this includes automating functional testing. So code-based acceptance testing. Acceptance testing here could be written in Apex or other languages, but basically it focuses on ensuring you're meeting the functional requirements, and UI testing through tools like Selenium and Provar, but also looking at the non-functional testing, going deeper on static analysis, security analysis, performance testing, and then doing code reviews, actually a type of non-functional testing. And Copado has a lot of inbuilt capabilities for this, as do many third-party tooling providers. These automated tests are ideal for deflecting a lot of issues before they get to your manual QA. Manual QA and acceptance testing are critically important in except for maybe the most advanced teams, but you want to address all of the easy issues that can be detected automatically before you put things on the plate of testers. So within the Copado continuous delivery tool, we've got the ability to define these quality gates in between any one of these steps, between any of these environments. You can say, I want to do automated compliance scans, check for kinds of XML and profile and permission sets that may be not permitted for your orgs or for your team. You want to run Selenium tests. You can orchestrate all of that through this quality gate interface that's built into Copado. Yeah, on the topic of deploying and releasing, Andrew.
Well, that's the trick. We've got it all ready. We've tested it. We believe it's the highest quality. How do we get it out into the hands of the users?
Great. So one thing we like to emphasize is that deploying is actually different from releasing. So normally when you do a deployment, for most teams, most of the time, you release by deploying. So you deploy it and then the users have it, and that's great. It's very straightforward, but there's a lot of disadvantages. Deployments have to be scheduled, they have to be coordinated with user training, they could be high risk and high stress, hard to roll back. There's a lot of power separating deployments from releases, though, with things like carefully controlling the permissions and when you give permissions to users, controlling layouts so you can release something but not expose it yet in the layout, using dynamic lightning pages, which are getting more powerful with lightning layouts, feature flags, these kinds of things. There is some cost in terms of technical debt or complexity to doing things this way, but there's a lot of power, the ability to deploy during normal business hours and then release it to users when you're ready, the ability to do user acceptance testing in production for small numbers of users, do A/B testing to try out 2 different variations to see which users like best, and the idea of canary deployments where you can roll it out to a few users, but then roll it back when you need. So a lot of power in all of this, and this is an area of focus that's still kind of in its early days in the Salesforce world, but this is part of where we're going, I think.
So I think hopefully today we've shown you a tremendous amount of kind of tricks and tips and that value of DevOps with Salesforce. As you can see, DevOps is not something that you do overnight. It is not just a technical platform. It is an overall strategy to maximize the return on investment, the delivery velocity, and the quality of innovation that you can deliver off of the Salesforce platform. Andrew, you've taken many, many clients and customers through this journey. Any tricks and tips that you would tell people as they embark on their DevOps Salesforce journey?
Yeah, like I mentioned at the beginning, DevOps is something like productivity, right? It's not something that you finish. It's something that you're always working towards. It's the effectiveness of your team and the efficiency of your team. Therefore, it's really key to take a long-term patient view, to think this is not something that you can just, you can't just buy a tool and it'll magically take care of it for you. Tools are a critical part of a long-term journey, and that's why, Copado, we're really here to support everybody's journey through this whole process. It's not something you just turn on or off. So you need to understand where you need to understand your current processes, and using value stream mapping is a powerful way to do that. Benchmarking, like with one of these DevOps assessments that Andrew is mentioning in the GoToWebinar chat here, is a powerful way to sort of see where you are today. Take basic steps, but then it's an iterative process of figuring out what's your next most effective improvement, and then progressing iteratively over the course of weeks, months, and years, because you need to be able to sustain the effort and energy and prove from the outset that you're getting business results.
Now, for those of you who are not familiar with us at Copado, Copado's been around Salesforce for 7 years. We're really focused with delivering the highest level thought leadership around DevOps to really allow you to maximize that investment in the Salesforce platform. You can see we work with some of the biggest, most sophisticated names. We work with the mid-sized companies. We work with many small companies, but to really be able to optimize your delivery innovation on the platform. We're focused on 3 core things. Number 1, enterprise trust. We've gone through all the compliancy, whether it's ISO, GDPR, HIPAA. We're really focused on delivering that highest level of enterprise trust to our customers. As I mentioned, and you can see through today's webinar, we're really focused on bringing DevOps as a thought leader to Salesforce in order to really kind of bring this revolution and this idea of thinking to the ecosystem. And finally, most important, it's all about delivering a superior experience to our customers who use us. The average velocity increase they see is at 15x. We have certification through our academy. We have a number of expert services and partner accelerators. We've got a whole set of enterprise level global support for you. But for those of you who are not familiar with us, please, we're at every major Salesforce event, whether that's Dreamforce, the World Tours. We try to participate in all of the user groups. Please come and see us, talk to us in person. We'd be happy to walk through any of the challenges and share our advice with you. Next. Of course, what we're providing is a native CI/CD DevOps platform that we're very proud to say is built 100% on the Salesforce platform. On the left-hand side, you can see that we deliver by far the most CI and CD DevOps best practices pre-built into the solution. All of this is running natively out of the Salesforce UX, whether that's Lightning, whether that is the dashboards, whether you want to tie this into Einstein Analytics, tying this into Flow and Chatter and collaboration. You can run your entire DevOps strategy from within Salesforce. We also provide all of the pre-built integrations that you need to create that bridge to the third-party DevOps ecosystem. And as we've mentioned before, absolutely laser focused on security and compliance. Next slide. Now, what I want to do is invite Karen Fidelik, and Andrew mentioned this earlier. Karen is an example of one of the people we work with on the platform. And Karen, you've spent a lot of time around ALM or application lifecycle management, version control, APIs. But if you would, I know we've got a lot of questions from the audience. Please let us know.
Yeah, thanks, both Andrews. This has been great. We've got some questions here. I'm going to kind of try to go through as many as we can. There's been a couple questions, first of all, around seeing demos of the product. And I know we didn't plan to do an explicit demo in this presentation, but is there a way that folks can get a better view of the product in action? What would you guys recommend? I know at Dreamforce you'll be there, but if they're not going to be at Dreamforce, what are the other options?
Yeah, hey, let me jump in on that. There is a full demo showcase on Copado.com. If you go out, you'll see a spot that says demos. Most of the demos we've put up there are about 2 to 5 minutes. Now that you've seen the overall DevOps cycle, you'll see that we've organized them from overview to plan to create to test. That's the first place that I would go to kind of get a feel for the product. But we're happy to deliver a live demo, tailor it specifically for anyone who wants to see the product. As I mentioned, we're at every major event, whether that's Dreamforce or the World Tours. Come on over, because ultimately that's how developers are able to learn about these platforms. You've got to get inside, you've got to see it at work, and we're happy to provide that at any time for you.
Okay, great. We've got a question here from somebody who I think is probably using the product or thinking about using the product. Is there any release strategy for having a license only to release engineer access to Copado? So release engineer only, not developer.
Yeah, so basically we have 2 types of licenses at Copado. We have the administrator who has full access and can administrate all capabilities within the platform from the beginning of the CI process all the way through deployment and delivery. So you definitely can get one single user license. I think it's somewhere in around 300 per user. There is a platform license. It starts at 10,000 per year, which gives you the core capability. That's that native platform that's built directly into the Salesforce platform. So you can do one user. Most people, of course, have both the user and they have the administrator. They have many more users that use the capability that are then administrated by the single administrator.
Okay, great. We don't use GitHub, Jenkins. Would Copado still work for us?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So Copado handles the actual automation for you, and that's what Jenkins would normally do. You don't have to use version control. Copado obviously predates the time when people in the Salesforce world were all using version control. So you can certainly get started with Copado to help you even without version control. But I think quite importantly, it gives you a way, Copado gives you a way to transition onto version control. And so you can use GitHub or Bitbucket or any of the other version control hosts once you start that process. But basically, yeah, it provides everything you'll need.
Excellent. Okay. So we've had a couple questions too about challenges around Salesforce metadata API where the output is not consistent in terms of the element order that's coming out in the metadata XML. And the question is, how do you recommend overcoming this challenge in terms of using it with source control systems like Git, where that creates noise related to changes being detected in that source? Do you have any guidance on that?
Yeah, that's there. Karen, you may be better.
I know, that's right.
He was in charge of the metadata API, but make a note. But
I can comment. So we are aware of cases where that order is inconsistent, and we do try to address that where possible. So that said, there are cases where we have issues with that, where the order may not be consistent from run to run when you retrieve that metadata. So curious if you guys have any guidance on when that happens, how do you basically manage changes that aren't logical changes?
Basically, that's one thing that Copado does. Basically, it acts as an interface between the Salesforce metadata API and the users, and it helps to manage the whole process. So we actually do a whole lot of processing on the back end. We take what the metadata API gives. There's a lot of changes that a lot of issues that we can automatically fix. A lot of these kinds of, issues with sequencing or complex merges and so forth. We do all of that behind the scenes. There's quite a lot of intelligence built into the product. If you're managing that on your own, you're more likely to, you'll have to build a lot of tooling yourself. And that's why there are these Salesforce specific tools like Copado. It basically fills a need because there are complexities that you don't face on non-Salesforce platforms.
All right. What's the strategy to keep personal dev environments in sync with integration and test environments, and at the same time be able to switch between multiple feature development environments? Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. Teams typically either use shared development environments, shared sandboxes, or individual sandboxes. And there's sort of pros and cons to both, but at the end of the day, if you can make it easy to synchronize changes, then it's much better to have individual and personal level development environments. So in the pipeline view that we showed, that's really where Copado would help with the continuous integration, the ability to take changes and merge them between different developer environments. And so a developer would track their work, wrap it in the form of a user story, and then that user story can be deployed automatically to their colleagues. So that helps to synchronize those development environments and help to simplify understanding and tracking what differences there might be.
Okay, great. Let's see. This might be similar to what you were just describing, but does Copado do diff deploys, only deploying changes which have been changed, which are, I guess, detected as changes from the source control system?
Yeah, it's really quite a quite a toolkit. There's a whole lot of tools built into there, including the ability to take snapshots of different environments and to see how they might differ from the snapshots you have from other environments or from snapshots you have in version control, and then to take action on that. So you can see the differences either between the two environments or between the environments and version control. And you can then turn those into a user story or into a deployment.
Okay, we're I think just about at time here.
Yep, and Karen, I can tell you, I can see a lot of questions still streaming in on the Q&A. There's a couple questions, and let me throw one real quick out to Andrew Davis before we end. Somebody was saying if it runs completely on Salesforce, what's the size?
Sorry, can you ask that again? I didn't quite understand.
If it runs completely on Salesforce, what is the size?
I see, the size of the package. So one of the things, Copado doesn't store, it uses both Salesforce on the front end and Heroku on the back end. So it actually keeps the package size for Copado pretty small. So it's not a very heavy package. And a lot of people, our users do install it in their production orgs. There's not a risk of running out of space or anything like that, although we have other users that do separate it out into a separate org for security purposes.
Perfect. Well, with that, there's probably a bunch of other questions that we'll try to answer one-on-one. We're at the top of the hour. I want to thank the folks at Salesforce. Karen, thank you so much for being with us and your support and help and guidance on the platform. Andrew Davis, congratulations on the book. Looking forward to kind of getting that copy out. Everybody, the best place to go, copado.com. You can get both an assessment. By doing an assessment, you get a free copy of Andrew's book. We're happy to talk with you, take you through any kind of live demos. And if you're at any event, whether that's Dreamforce or the World Tour, please come visit us, get a live demo, talk to our folks. We'd love to sit down, understand your challenges, and see how we can help. So thanks on behalf of Copado. Thank you to Salesforce and today's audience. We appreciate your time.
Bye.